Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a really exciting conversation featuring our guest speakers on this really important conversation on equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm actually going to give us a few more minutes to allow some more attendees to join, and then we will go ahead and get started. All right. So my name is Alicia. I want to introduce myself, and I am the Credentialing Academy support team. I am also the primary contact for our Higher Education Consortium and our Council Alumni Network. So I am happy that we are able to present this conversation, this discussion to everyone today. So for today's agenda, what we're going to do first is you'll hear an opening statement by our moderator, and you'll be introduced to our panelists. We're also then going to view a very clip video from Dr. Chantel Mick, who is also a renowned specialist in on this topic of equity. We'll move into our panel questions. We will then have a closing statement by our moderator, and then we'll go into some question and answers. If you have any questions, there is a questions box that you should see on your control panel. And you can ask questions throughout, but I will not verbally announce those questions until we get to that Q&A session. So I would like to introduce everyone to our moderator. Her name is Vilma Williams. She works here at the council with us. She's the manager of multilingual and special programs. And this topic is very near and dear to her heart. She's very passionate about equity and really providing how we can continue to provide equity across our nation through special communities and having programs where they're also at the table and have the same resources and opportunities as everyone else. So Vilma, if you'd like to go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Alicia. Welcome to our virtual Higher Education Consortium event, Shaping the Future of the Profession Through Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. My name is Vilma Williams, Manager of Multilingual and Special Programs at the Council, and today I will be your moderator. We live exciting and challenging times, and there is no doubt that the United States of America's demographics have changed, and we are a true melting pot of people. There is diversity everywhere. But what does this mean? Why do we often hear about equity and inclusion being important? How much do we know about these topics? And why are they important in our profession? Even using EDI instead of the more common DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion is a choice many are making to put equity first in the conversation. As early educators working at different levels in higher education, we have a unique opportunity to assume an active role in equity, diversity, and inclusion through unity and quality education improvement work and initiatives. The Council has invited a very special group of experts in these subjects who will be talking to us about historical and current perspectives, definitions of EDI principles, and action steps you can take at your organization to help shape the future of our profession. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Dr. Lisa Grant from Early Childhood by Design, Christine Belinda from Better Kid Care, Laurie Strauss from Better Kid Care, and Dr. Christine Anthony from Better Kid Care. Welcome to each of you, and please introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Lisa Grant, and I am the principal consultant and founder at Early Childhood by Design, which is a consulting firm focused on the holistic design of early childhood programs and systems with the goal of making high quality early childhood accessible to all children and families. I also lead the work of the Birth to Third Grade Partnership for the City of Cambridge here in Massachusetts. I have an educational background rooted in child development and educational equity, and I've been working in early childhood for over 25 years as a director, a higher education faculty, and consultant. I'm happy to be here with all of you today.
Hi, this is Christine Belinda. I'm happy to be here today as well with this group. I've been in the elementary and early childhood education field for over 30 years in various roles. The last 15 years with Penn State Better Kid Care as an early learning program development specialist. I currently develop professional development online courses and resources for early childhood educators and out of school time professionals, including development of our Better Kid Care CDA Gold course. And I'm also the CDA project coordinator. I'm a member of a team that developed the Better Kid Care Comprehensive Online Health and Safety course to meet the Federal Child Care and Development Block Grant. And I was also part of a recent coaching project designed to build capacity for coaching within the ECE programs in Pennsylvania. And more recently, and related to this topic, some of the content development I've been working on, which has been really exciting and rewarding, has been preventing expulsion and suspension, coaching from the teacher's lens, cultural diversity and responsiveness in early childhood education, coaching in mindfulness, and positive work environments. I'm honored to be included in this inaugural Council Alumni Network and Higher Education Consortium to discuss this important topic.
Hi everyone, this is Laurie Strauss. I'm very excited to be here with you today. I'm a Better Kid Care Early Learning Program Specialist, which means that I'm responsible for creating professional development courses and materials that support the early care and education workforce. My area of interest is equity and diversity, which has been helpful in informing my current work around anti-racism, positive work environments, and COVID-19. I'm also a member of local and state level work groups that focus on educational topics related to marginalized populations and culturally responsive teaching. But I'm really proud to say that I gained firsthand experience implementing anti-bias, anti-racist education practices as a supervising teacher of a mixed-age preschool classroom here on Penn State's University Park campus.
I'll echo what everyone has said, and am very thankful and proud to be part of this panel. I am Christine Anthony. I am the program coordinator of the Penn State Better Kid Care program. I have been with Better Kid Care for just under 5 years. And prior to jumping on board with Better Kid Care, my professional career, all 35 years of it, was in higher ed in some capacity. I've taught at the community college level as a faculty member in a teacher preparation program in the state of Pennsylvania. I was a department head for a while for a teacher preparation program, and prior to coming to Better Kid Care, I was the director of academic advising and teacher certification for the College of Education at Penn State. Lisa, Dr. Grant and I both got our undergraduate degrees from the same department here at Penn State. And then my master's and my PhD are from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And my hope for today is that everybody who's listening can take away some important, relevant ideas and thoughts on this large topic we're getting ready to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you to each of you. What a great panel we have today. Before we start, we have a special clip from a conversation at Council Live with a renowned expert in today's Dr. Chantel Mick, a professor of practice and founding director of the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University.
The community where I grew up was, I don't know what the statistic is, but it must be over 95% Mexican and Mexican American, almost 100% bilingual. Kind of joke sometimes that you go to McDonald's and you're just as likely to get your order taken in English as you are in Spanish, or maybe more likely in Spanish. You know, my grandmother took care of me and was my childcare growing up, and she lived probably like 200 feet from the border fence, and I could see it from my backyard too. So, you know, it's like a very resilient and tight knit and you know, good community. It also has its challenges. Every school in the community is a Title I school. But growing up, you know, what do you know about Title I school? It's just life, right? By the time I got to high school, I remember, again, similar to the rest of the communities, vast majority Mexican, Mexican American. I remember having a teacher, and you know, often we talk about the really positive teacher experiences, and I had lots of those. But I remember this particular high school teacher that he asked us, you know, raise your hand if you want to go to university, you know, after high school. And like over half the class raised their hand, including me. And then his response was, well, maybe one of you will make it to the university, a couple more at the community college, and the rest of you aren't going anywhere. And this was, you know, a white teacher in a classroom of all Mexican and Mexican American. So it's like an added dynamic there.
Wow. What a deep and sad message in this video. Thanks, Dr. Mick. There are so many things that come to my mind, and I'm pretty sure yours too. Let's talk about this. Let's start with some questions from our panel. So let's begin with the first question. So there seems to be some confusion around the terms equity and equality. What is the best way to define the two with clear separation? We're gonna ask this question. Maybe the Penn State University Better Kid Care can answer to begin.
Yeah, thank you, Velma. I think this is a really important question to kind of level set the whole discussion. And I do believe that there has been some confusion around these terms. And I think verbally, one of the most simplistic ways, probably even oversimplistic, to define the two terms with clear separation is this. Equality, meaning each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities, while equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Visually, we have a graphic from the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation. It's a simplistic look at the difference between equality and equity, but to echo what I had just said, equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. So you can see under the equality part of this graphic, everybody is given the same bike with the goal of going for a bike ride. And then the equity part of this graphic shows that every person has different circumstances. So somebody needs a bike that has accommodations. The child gets a child-sized bike. And so the equity part of this really takes into consideration what each individual needs to reach an equal outcome, which in this case is bike riding. I think Laurie from Better Kid Care was going to add a little bit to that discussion.
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit more about how we allocate resources. Historically, the ways that we've distributed resources have been influenced by bias. Those same biases that have shaped past and current inequities that are rooted in our social, political, economic, and educational structures have impacted the field of early care and education. And so when I think about this, I find it helpful to picture a balance scale in my mind. And right now, one side of that scale is heavy. It's weighed down after receiving a disproportionate share of resources over an extended period of time. And if we're working from an equity lens, then our goal is to balance that scale by intentionally reallocating our resources and giving priority to those who have historically been underserved and marginalized. If instead we're working from an equality lens, that means that we prioritize giving both sides of the scale the same amount of resources from now moving forward. And although that might sound fair, the problem is that the side that was already heavy with resources continues to accrue more on top of what it already has been provided. And so really, this strategy of equality maintains the disproportion and the status quo, and the scale remains unbalanced. Christine, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just that when we're talking about equity, we think of educational equity, meaning that every student has access to the resources that you just talked about, but access to resources and education and support they need at that right moment in their education, regardless of language, ethnicity, race, gender, disability, and family background or family income. And so understanding equity, it's hard work. It requires access to professional development and educational experiences and policies and systems that prepare educators like ourselves and leaders too to offer educational experiences grounded in equity. And so when I think about all we have to know, race, gender, language, it's hard work, but it's also heart work from our human-centered process. It's deepening our human relationships. And when we do that, it helps to make clear these many layered threads of inequities, even the most subtle inequities. And so cultivating relationships that focus on listening, hearing, and respecting another's voice is foundational to building equitable early childhood communities. And equity relies on cultural humility, that sense that our own knowledge is limited when it comes to truly understanding another's culture. To better understand another's perspective, to carefully examine our interactions. And so when we connect the hard work that's centered around equity literacy and access to resources and that research with our heart work centered around building relationships, that really helps us to crystallize and understand equity. And I think Lisa had some points to share as well.
Sure. I think you all captured that so eloquently. And I think the only thing that I'll add is, thinking about it at a classroom level, young children do start to develop a sense of fairness or a baseline understanding of equity at a very young age. For example, understanding a physical accommodation within the classroom that might be necessary to support a friend with differing needs. That concept of fairness or equity, though, becomes much more abstract as it relates to concepts such as race, and quite frankly can be difficult for even a lot of adults to contend with. But really, ultimately, the need to differentiate in order to achieve equity for everyone remains the same. So having that commitment, no matter how difficult or easy that understanding or that concept might be, it is very critical.
Wow. Does anybody else wants to add to this answer to this question? So this is so interesting because when people talk about equity, equality, there's kind of definitions, but you have mentioned a lot of things about equity that stand out. For example, it's hard work. It doesn't come naturally sometimes. It's hard work, and it's equity relates to cultural humility. That is so important, and also it requires our work to prepare educators. We need to be prepared for this. We need to it has to bring lots of information and concepts that we need to absorb and believe, because one of the things that Lisa said is commitment. It takes commitment too. And I think that differentiating the adult notion and understanding of equity is different than children. That was very insightful. Thank you so much. Let's go to our next question. The next question is, what are some of the equity issues the early childhood education community faces, and how do you suggest we go about addressing those issues? And I would like Dr. Grant to please give us your comments on this.
Thank you, Vilma. So the equity issues facing the field of early childhood education are really complicated, as I'm sure you all are aware, and very multi-layered. So, looking at the classroom level, practitioners and researchers alike have long been focused on defining and redefining, as well as supporting culturally responsive education so that we can ensure that all children are having a high quality experience. In more recent years, the issue of preschool suspension and expulsion has really come to the forefront, as we know that this issue disproportionately impacts Black and Brown children, with Black boys and girls representing only about 18% of the population, and yet representing about half of all expulsions that happen in preschool. Looking at the issue from a program level, we know that funding for early childhood education is not at the level needed to ensure that all children have access to high quality. And so as a result, family decisions about who and how and where their children attend preschool is based on factors like affordability and geography, and not necessarily on quality, which are barriers that we know are then compounded for Black and Brown families. When it comes to high quality, it then becomes either unaffordable, inaccessible, or just in short supply for the number of children and families who need it. And then you add to that the notion of, how are we defining quality? We know that the policies and practices are largely established by the dominant culture. And so how do we then uncover the racism and or bias that are rooted in those policies? And then lastly, looking at the systems level, particularly as it relates to the workforce, we know that there's an overrepresentation of women of color in our field, with Black and Brown women more likely working in assistant teacher and aide positions, which receive lower pay historically. And then Black and Brown women are also more likely working as family child care providers, as well as infant and toddler teachers, which we also know typically receive lower pay. And then you have the underrepresentation of women of color in leadership. So not just at the program level, but then also in research and higher education and in policy. In terms of how we address all of this, I do believe that moving the needle starts with those in positional power. It's really important to examine policies and practices to uncover the racism and bias that exists within them, and then work to redesign those policies and practices in collaboration with and led by those that are most impacted by them.
That is, oh, wow. Anybody else wants to add to this? Any comments to this question? So we hear it's complicated, and we hear Dr. Grant, we hear you very loud and clear. And I think that this also takes us to think about how can we address this. I think that we also had to be more involved in the policies that, in the procedures and the policies that, in the processes that you mentioned. So if there are any leaders here, that is your call. We need to start doing that. We need to also work with families, because families need to be educated. Dr. Grant is saying, families usually are choosing high quality. They're not choosing high quality, they're just choosing geographically affordability. But I think that if we empower them, also we can create a force to be able to overcome these situations that are so sad. And that, talking about these challenges, let's go to our next question. What are the challenges surrounding equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the higher education sector? Now let's focus a little bit now on the higher education sector. And I would like to ask Dr. Christine Anthony to please give us answers to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Velma. As I thought about identifying some of the challenges in the higher ed sector, two things became readily apparent as I was kind of ticking things off in my mind. There are a lot of challenges and barriers, and so I needed to pick just a few to focus on, which I will do. And then I thought it might be important just to give a little brief explanation about where Penn State Better Kid Care sits in the higher education sector. Penn State is Pennsylvania's land-grant university, and as such, our instructional mission is a little bit different than a typical institution of higher ed. Our instructional mission includes not only providing for undergraduate and graduate education, but equally important to land-grant institutions is providing continuing education and what is known as extension education. And so some of you may live in states where you hear, like we're called Penn State Extension. Maybe you hear Iowa State Extension. And often in people's minds, they start to think about agriculture when they hear extension or food systems. And so when we talk about Penn State Better Kid Care sitting in extension, to some it might seem like an odd fit, but there is a thread, a unit in extension that is food, family, and health, and below that is a family well-being unit of extension. And so that's where we sit. Better Kid Care sits in that continuing education or extension education space. Penn State Extension has a vision that includes the goal of being a world leader in non-credit education. And so that is where we sit. Better Kid Care provides non-academic credit-bearing professional development opportunities. So you can take professional development courses from Penn State Better Kid Care without being a student at Penn State. You won't earn academic credit. You could earn CEUs, and they count for professional development hours in most states. And that becomes important as we start to talk about, the idea of stackable credentials. And so where we sit right now is not an academic department that is charged with teacher preparation. Penn State has those programs, but they fall under a different mission category. So they're more under an academic affairs umbrella than a continuing education or extension umbrella. Fortunately, my career has afforded me many opportunities to work in those types of departments. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what universities can do in terms of the non-credit piece, and then transition a little bit to some of the challenges in the teacher preparation departments that lead to teacher certification or licensure. And so as we all know, there are many entry points into the profession, and the higher ed sector really as a whole is well positioned to put in place policies and practices to meet the educational needs at all entry levels. So institutes of higher ed can provide non-credit PD, some offer CDA, some offer associates, and even advanced degrees. But we know that access to training, education, and professional development there are differences based on characteristics of professionals that include their race and ethnicity and cultural background. So finally getting to the EDI part of this. Just recently, Paschal, Medial, and Haley, 2020, a new study that came out that really digs a little deeper into some of those differences, if anybody is interested. The commonality across those entry points is that whether you are coming in or are currently sitting in a director role, if you're an assistant teacher, and in some states, if you're a bus driver, you're going to have some non-credit bearing professional development that is required. And because we sit in higher ed at Penn State Better Kid Care, as an organization, we really felt that we needed to take some intentional, deliberate steps to identify the challenges in the professional development space related to EDI. And some of that specific work that we've done we'll share later, hoping that you may be able to glean something from our experience to do in your personal work setting. I will say one of the positives of our work as a non-credit bearing professional development organization is that we have a pretty broad reach, and we have what I've been calling demographic parity with the ECE workforce. And so, and I think this is probably the same for other organizations that provide non-credit PD, an essential piece in sort of starting that stacking of credentials. We have about 800 to 950 courses completed in our system every day. And we have aides, we have lead teachers, we have home-based providers, we have directors and owners. But one of the things that's very different about our type of organization is that when we look at the racial profile of our learners, we actually reflect the workforce. So that is what I mean by we have parity in the workforce. So for instance, depending upon which report you're looking at, the ECE workforce is 56 to 60% white. Our demographic use, 60% of our users are white. For people who are, for Black Americans, the workforce suggests it's 15 to 17%, not 70, 15 to 17% of the workforce is Black. Our users report 23% of them are Black. And then the Hispanic proportion of the EC workforce is 7 to 10%. And BKC, our use is 12%. BKC, when I say that, I mean Better Kid Care. And so why am I sharing this? Why is this important? I think that this sets organizations that provide non-credit professional development significantly apart and different from most teacher certifications or licensure programs. This kind of demographic parity that we have, and I imagine other PD orgs have, comes with a very significant responsibility with respect to EDI. We have to ask ourselves, and we are asking ourselves, and we have been, but we have some different energy behind it now. Things like, are we meeting our learners where they are? Are we welcoming them? Are we providing representative content? How do we know if we are sharing appropriate content given our personal demographic makeup of the staff at Better Kid Care? So those are some of the questions we're asking, and we'll share a little more about that later. I want to transition a little bit, and Velma, tell me if I'm talking too much, because
you're doing great, and I think what you're telling us is so interesting because we want to learn what is the key. How does your success happen? So yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to talk now a little bit about the other higher ed sector, which I think a lot of people are much more familiar with, and that is, those academic departments that offer certification and licensure. So as I just mentioned, the ECE workforce is more diverse than the K-12 workforce, with the K-12 workforce being 82% white. And so that begs the question, well, why? Why is there that discrepancy between maybe someone who's teaching kindergarten versus someone who's working in an infant toddler setting? And what I've chosen to focus on in terms of the challenges is the whole notion that the certification licensure process that is often the culmination of a 4-year undergraduate program represents specific challenges and barriers with respect to DEI. And I'm just going to share a couple, and then I'll stop and let others chime in. One of the most significant, and I don't see too much written about this in our early childhood thought pieces. It's there, but I think we really need to dig into it a little deeper, is what I call the testing barrier, or the testing challenge. There was a 2019 paper in Education Week by Madeline Will, and the title of it was, "You're more likely to pass the bar than an elementary teacher licensing exam." So the whole premise was it's easier to pass a bar exam the first time around than it is to pass a teacher certification exam. In most states, certainly in Pennsylvania, the elementary teacher credential now encompasses the early childhood years. So when you're taking an elementary teacher certification, for instance, in Pennsylvania, it goes from birth until 4th grade. So more than half of aspiring teachers at the end of their 4-year program are failing the most common licensing exam the first time they take it. And that number is important because it has serious implications for the diversity of the profession. I mean, that pass rate is lower than the first-time pass rate for doctors, for lawyers taking the bar, and nuclear engineers. The only ones who do worse first time they take a certification test are CPAs. Importantly, only 38% of Black candidates and 57% of Hispanic candidates ever pass the most common licensing exam. That's compared to 75% of white candidates. And here's the real takeaway, I think. The National Council on Teacher Quality, who their research is in this in several papers about this topic, they estimate that 8,600 candidates of color each year are unable to enter the classroom because of the testing barrier. So that means that after a 4-year program, they give up on the test, they walk away, and they don't become a teacher. And that's very, I think it's sad, and I think it's telling, and I think it's an area that needs some real focus in the future. Another testing barrier, like in states like PA, you have to take a test that's called a basic skills test, also offered by Praxis, and then we have our homegrown version here in Pennsylvania that shows basic math and reading skill. So it's actually called the basic skills test. You have to show basic skills in reading, writing, and math. I can tell you when I sat in my most previous job, we had about a 50% fail rate the first time through. And so there's, again, yet another hurdle at the beginning to even become a major. In some places, they have these entrance to major requirements. And then the failing is an issue in and of itself. But when you consider that the minimum cost to take any of these tests is $130, retaking them then becomes another barrier in terms of economics. And then I just want to mention one more thing, and then I will wrap up and give others a chance to speak. In the report, start with equity, 14 priorities to dismantle systemic racism in early care and education. One of the priorities identified by the Children's Equity Project is particularly relevant, I think, in this discussion. And I think it was number 5 or number 7, embed equity in workforce prep and development. So the recommendation is that anyone working in the ECE system should have comprehensive and sustained training across a lot of different subject areas: history of race, racism, implicit bias, dual language learning, inclusive practices. And it's a real, I can tell you because I've had to write programs from scratch. I had to take new guidelines and write a program, a teacher preparation program for early childhood. And it's a significant challenge for higher ed programs to provide what is needed for equity and all the other requirements that are often state mandated. And so to get all that into a program, which is crucial, there needs to be some real thought and a group of professionals who are dedicated to making sure all those things are taught in the context of other courses, but also some standalone courses. And when you are sitting around a table and you have to cut course content to create a program, it becomes very challenging. And so I think one way to help meet that particular challenge is by really providing more opportunities for faculty, qualified faculty to come from diverse populations to help develop the curriculum, the programs of study, to help set a research agenda that honors DEI. And I think that's all I'm going to say right now, because I feel like I've talked a really long time, and I'm happy to hear what anybody else would like to add to that.
Yeah, let's hear from others. Do you have anything to add about challenges? I think you covered so much.
I did. I went.
I was taking notes, and I was thinking, if we need to, if we said, you know, Dr. Grant said equity means that we're required to work and prepare the educators. But on the other hand, when we are trying to prepare the educators, we are using one way for everybody, you know, like we're just giving the exams for everybody, and we don't care, you know, about what are those needs that that we need to meet so that people can successfully take these exams. Right? There's this whole study on exams, even for children. You know, I have so many stories about children that failed exam for things that are not pertinent. They're not significant in these exams. They don't match, you know, with the learning and you know what, even with practice, you know. So it's a disconnect. I think we have a disconnect that we have to work on quick. And one of the things that is, you know, I'm thinking about is that Dr. Grant said, now moving forward, and that's going to be the thing I'm taking from this. Now moving forward, what are we going to do? You know, and we have to do it quick, because this cannot. It's very late. I mean, this is happening for many years, and we need to do something about it. So I'm so happy that there's so many people attending this, because we're going to take a message. We're going to carry the message and hold the torch to do something about this. So if one more call for anybody to add to this question about the challenges, so we can move to the next question. So I guess we have to move to the next question. So the next question, I'm gonna ask Dr. Grant to guide us with this. What does it mean for you to have a commitment? You talk about commitment at the beginning to diversity, and what should be our call to action? What can we do?
Thank you, Vilma. So philosophically, having a commitment to diversity and equity and inclusion means being able to really listen and engage with people from all spaces and places and perspectives. It means being willing to have open and honest conversation, kind of like we're doing today, as well as being open enough to do things radically different than what you may be used to doing. I also think it means being willing to give up space to ensure that other voices are represented in the work. More practically speaking, serving as an advocate is a very concrete thing a person or organization can do in order to impart change in this space. So as many of you know, the COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted the inequities in early childhood, both as it relates to access for children and families, but also as well as the impact it's had on the workforce, who I believe now, you know, after, you know, many years of advocating for ourselves, that society is finally starting to see as being essential workers in our country. And so with that, I think there's a lot of increased interest as well as funding opportunities at the local and state and federal level to support early childhood education, which is great. So knowing that increased funding can help to begin to support a more accessible and equitable system, speaking to elected officials, weighing in on legislation that impacts early childhood when there are opportunities to do so, and then using the power of our vote is very critical. Here in Massachusetts, we're actually currently in the midst of a redesign of our child care licensing and quality rating system standards. And the Office of Early Care and Education here has been doing a fantastic job of engaging the field and being able to advise and give feedback on that work. So rather than like a top-down approach, really engaging the community of early childhood education to inform what those licensing standards and quality rating standards look like. So for us, that's a great way for us to be engaged as leaders in providing feedback at the systems level. But then I also feel a sense of obligation to support and encourage those we work with in all roles in our field and at all levels to do the same, because that engagement is what can really be what makes longstanding change.
That's wonderful. Does anybody have anything to add to that?
Sorry. You would think by now I wouldn't have such a hard time unmuting. We've been doing these kinds of meetings for quite a while.
Yes.
So I will give a little bit of an intro about what the commitment to diversity at BKC looks like, and then Christine and Laurie will talk a little more about some of the specifics, because I think some of the work we've done recently can really kind of set a blueprint for some other organizations. BKC has been committed to diversity, equity, inclusion since its inception. We realize that means you need to be flexible, you need to be able to move, that you're never done with this work. But with COVID-19 and some of the things happening in our society last summer, there was a group of staff at BKC who really wanted to have deeper discussions and really kind of hit things head on. We were willing to do the uncomfortable work. I might be stealing Laurie's thunder, but there's a book that she has that she let me borrow, and it's called Start Where You Are, But Don't Stay There. And so we really took that to heart. But what we found, and as the leader of Better Kid Care, I was a little hesitant to have us jump into this work. But we framed it in a way, framed it actually through an equity lens. We had staff who just weren't ready to dive in, to do the work. And so we created a work group and invited everybody on our staff to be involved in it. And we all came into the work at different individual places with our understanding of the concepts, the history, and we embraced those differences, but we also knew that there are people who just weren't ready to be involved in that. And they were invited, they chose not to be part of the work group. And that's just really a good example of looking at this whole idea through an equity lens. We relied on Penn State materials to get started because Penn State has already had lots of statements put out. And so that was a starting point for us. But an important mindset for us going into this was that it was going to be a process that takes a long time. In fact, I think I'll recognize that's a process that's never going to end. You know, everybody is busy. And so we needed to carve out the time that was doable and reasonable for our staff in the context of our other responsibilities. And so we intentionally have meetings on our calendars. They're scheduled, you know, a year out. We leave our work together with smaller group work that we work on and bring it back to the whole group, the whole work group. And then we put it out to the whole staff when it's ready to do that. And so our commitment to diversity really started with trying to find a way to have, to walk right into the topic, to go towards it, not walk away from it. And we have done a pretty good job, I think, with starting to make some headway. We've got some real tangible changes we've made. And a lot of it started with some work that Christine suggested that we do, and I'm going to let her talk about how we really began the process and how we kind of set the table for what we've done.
Thank you, Chris and Velma. Yeah, so our first task was developing this shared understanding and these shared definitions, so we could, you know, develop a commitment statement and plan of action, because we needed to ensure that we understood one another as we approach this important work and sustainability. And as Chris said, this long haul. And it is hard work. Back to the very beginning, it is hard work. And so we know that. And so our commitment is, one of the things that came out of that is that we recognize and acknowledge that all individuals' lived experiences are shaped by historic, systemic, and present inequities. And with that guiding us, our commitment is to better understand the role that we play in dismantling and enabling educational inequities, and also to provide equitable professional development learning opportunities reflected in our current courses and resources, and also to continue to advance future development and equity with our ongoing professional development resources that are informed by current research, knowledge, policy, and practice. And as we know, that's changing, and so many new things are coming to our fingertips to learn more. And as Chris said, you know, it's a lot. And so we created subcommittees to help us do this work, and that helps us to manage time and our focus and our outcomes. And I'll give you one example of a subgroup. One of our subgroups worked on an equity content review tool. So to help us think about what are better ways that we can create content with an equity lens, our professional development through an equity lens. And so some of that tool, some of the things in that tool are who is underrepresented in this area, who is overrepresented, who is missing, what issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusivity relate to this topic in this course or professional development resource. Are diverse voices included in the development of the content, from research experts, expert interviews, providers, funds of knowledge, etc. And also, does the content exhibit implicit bias? And these are just a few. So again, you can see how hard this work is, but we are committed to improving our work and with that, our call of action from all of this, there are 3 main call of actions that we've come up with so far. And one is for our own self-diversity, equity, diversity, and inclusivity training as a team to advance our understanding. And consultation, this is another big one for us. Consultation with those knowledgeable in the field, because this process could help us think about new ideas that maybe we haven't thought of, and also support discussions where possibly we need to change some of our goals or refine them. And lastly, one of our key calls to action is to broaden our audience through outreach. Who are we missing again? And how can we include those groups? What are their strengths and what are their needs? And so this model could be something that anybody can do. As Chris said, we've carved out the time. And Laurie's going to share a little bit more about some of the histories that kind of relate to this as well.
I just wanted to start out by saying that to me, a commitment to diversity means that we reflect on ways that we can do things better, and then we set a course for how we're going to change. I watched a TED Talk recently by activist and DEI consultant Renee Myers, where she talked about overcoming biases, and her suggestion was that we walk boldly toward them. And that's one of the ways I think that Better Kid Care can support the field. We can use our work to spread the word about research and practices that support educators' understanding of equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, so that they can bring that to their colleagues, children, and families. Better Kid Care has been doing this work, as Chris said, for a long time. Our courses, our tip sheets, our articles have focused on a variety of topics, from things like cultural diversity and responsiveness to ACEs, suspension and expulsion, supporting LGBTQ youth, just to name a few. And we've also published courses in Spanish to provide an opportunity for Spanish language participants to access our courses. I think one of our strengths is our ability to be responsive to what's going on in the field and to what's going on in society. So in the last year, our call to action has been to walk boldly in the direction of inequity in the form of racism, so that we can address it head on. So far, we've published 2 courses out of a series of 4 that are focused on understanding race and racism, beginning with an anthropological perspective and moving learners through 8 competencies educators can work toward to create anti-racist early care and education programs. We also have recently published a course on social emotional learning and equitable practices that aims to increase educators' capacity to build equitable educational communities using the 5 cell core competencies. And then there's also our positive work environments course that is really looking at the ways programs can focus on developing a culture and a climate that fosters a sense of belonging. Our understanding of equity at Better Kid Care is always changing. And so I think that one of our commitments is to make sure that our content is evolving to keep pace.
Anybody else wants to add to this? This is a lot and it's wonderful. The commitment is there. And I praise you for doing all of that. And I hope that those that are listening are taking notes on this great work what an inspiration, when you talk about meeting the needs of others, the Spanish courses, and understanding not only what's going on in early childhood, but in society. And then, also the fact that we have talked during this time about something that sometimes we don't talk. We had to get involved in politics because we had to make sure that the policies reflect the needs and reflect our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We can't do it alone. I think for many, many years, the field has remained passive. And I think that it's time for us to wake up and do what we have to do. So we need like a revolution for this. And I'm happy that you are working on this already. Thank you so much for those comments. Let's move to the next question then. So this is the hot question. What are some practices that our audience can walk away with to help improve equity, diversity, and inclusion at their respective institutions? And how about you guys from BKC answering this question first? You said a lot of things about this, but I think that maybe you have more information.
We do. We weren't sure if Dr. Grant had prepared some remarks to go first.
Sure, I can jump in first, and then you all can jump in afterwards. And this echoes some of what you shared answering the last question, in terms of what you're doing at Better Kid Care. But I think it's important to really assess the demographics of your institution, both from a leadership and faculty perspective, but then also as well as from a student perspective to ensure that there's adequate representation, and that if there isn't, we're then better able to hold ourselves accountable to making changes so that opportunities are more accessible to all. We know that students have varying needs as it relates to ensuring success in higher education. And for students of color specifically, balancing school and personal responsibilities such as working full-time or managing a family while in school, the affordability of higher education, and then potentially having a lack of support can be significant factors that impede success. So creating policies that address those factors could be key. In terms of supporting success in both education and career, research has shown time and time again that mentorship is actually one of the single most impactful strategies that an organization or an institution can utilize to support the success, the recruitment and retention of people of color, both in jobs and in school. And so this isn't just traditional, like what we think of when we think of like having a mentor or a career mentor, but it's also meaning career sponsorship and then also psychosocial mentorship. So, when I talk about psychosocial mentorship, it really means, that meaning you have the support of someone who shares your race or your ethnicity and your experience to really help guide you as you move through your education and your career. Someone who really understands the stress and the trauma and the pressure that's experienced by people of color as we're navigating in and through those spaces. So that's a concrete strategy that any organization or institution can utilize to help ensure the success of those from diverse backgrounds in their educational institutions or in their workplaces.
Thank you so much. Anyone wants to add anything else?
I just wanted to jump in, and I'm going to go back actually to the quote that Chris shared with you earlier, that is, start where you are, but don't stay there. And I love that quote because to me, it's a powerful reminder that we all come to this work from different places and different starting points, and that's okay. What's really important is just that we don't stagnate, that we keep moving forward. There's a lot to learn, and sometimes it's overwhelming and it's really hard to know where to jump in. So that self-work of understanding how you fit into the story of race is a top priority, but so is the work of creating organizational change. And so I just wanted to let you know that Better Kid Care is sharing a tool with you today that you can access as part of this webinar. It comes from our course Anti-Racism Part 2, Program Policy and Family Engagement. One of the things that we've learned is that organizational policies and procedures are the drivers of equitable practices at all levels, no matter whether you're in the classroom, you're running a program, working in higher education and teacher preparation, or working for agencies that support ECE. So policies and practices, they're so important because they have the power to either open doors or create barriers. The handout we're sharing will hopefully be a tool that can help you to evaluate and reimagine your program policies and practices so that you can start thinking about them through an equity lens. And so we hope this tool will support your engagement in this work. And I'm thinking Christine has some other ideas to add on to that.
Yeah, just briefly, it's such amazing feedback we've heard from all presenters today. I love learning from my coworkers and from new peers. And I guess I want to go back to the very beginning too, when we talked about that hard work and heart work. When we're thinking about curating our professional development and higher education experiences that prepare educators to understand this incredible work and offer equitable experiences across all domains, we talked about creating a working equity, diversity, inclusivity working group to help identify strategies. We talked about today with Laurie and Dr. Grant and Dr. Anthony, developing and assessing, reviewing, and possibly even eliminating some of our policies that we have to have better policies and procedures and practices that include quality, equity, diversity, and inclusivity indicators and frameworks. But within all that hard work, we have to remember that heart work. And I like to go back to that Mr. Rogers quote where he tells us to look for the helpers. I mean, I've heard helpers today and even things I'm thinking about in this work, but there are helpers out there for us that have done this research and done this work. For example, your state's early childhood monitoring and accountability system, your EC workforce professional development system, your QRIS. And for example, in Pennsylvania, our Office of Child Development and Early Learning and our Pennsylvania Keys to Quality, which is our QRIS system, offer specific resources and tools for higher education faculty and instructors, tools and guidance and resources related to the full and equitable potential of young children who are diverse in terms of culture, language, ability, opportunity, and life circumstances. And as we've mentioned several times today, the Children's Equity Project, I think we've all mentioned that we started with a video from the director, Chantel Mick, and several of us have talked points from the Children's Equity Project. They have incredible reports, webinars, and they have a really great equity strategic plan template that it's very comprehensive and can inform our work. And a better kid care, and I'm sure all of us from this alumni group, we're excited to see the partnership that the CDA Council has with the Children's Equity Project and how that moves forward for the CDA credentialing process. And also our incredible National Association for the Education of Young Children, the Advancing Equity in Early Childhood Education position statement, and of course their higher education accreditation work. So we have helpers, and we have a helper. Our peer Roxy Nesselrode is putting links for you in chat to some of these documents, and also some other resources. And so I don't know if anybody else wants to share, but I just wanted to say, remember those helpers. But I'm going to open it to, oh, Laurie, wait, you had some things I think you wanted to, a couple more things you wanted to add to that list.
Well, I just wanted to say, that I feel like it's really important that we're always reading about diverse perspectives. And so one of the books that I have really been enjoying right now is Don't Look Away by Aruka Kirtan Durden and Eskig. And I also wanted to highlight a work by Louise Derman Sparks and Patricia Ramsey, What If All the Kids Are White? Because I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there's work for white children to be doing when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion, that sometimes because there's a little bit of a disconnect to this sense of race and culture, it's really, really important that we focus on that group.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have anything else to add before we move on? So I've been mesmerized listening to you, and you know, the more I listened, there's some things that are validated in respect to how, you know, we feel about this issue of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And from the conversation, I draw that, you know, go back to the fact that if we don't know people, if we don't know who we're serving, we're lost. You know, and if others don't know who we are serving, how could we embed equity in our work? And I think that knowing the populations, knowing the students, and it's the same thing in the classroom with the children. You know, if you don't know who's in your classroom, it's like going to a party and you don't know who are your guests, and you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail badly, right? Also, that the fact that we talked about representation in faculty is so important. It's the same thing. And we talk about social emotional, and when we talk about teaching students that are adults, it's such a diversity of students. You know, I was working with some universities and colleges, and I found some students where the first generation of the high school, for example, and then they were very young coming from high school, and then we have women who were in their 60s, who have been working in the field of early childhood education, and they just got a scholarship to go to school. So how can you know, I'm thinking about the picture of the bicycles, you know, and is it possible to do it? Yes, but it takes work, hard work, and a lot of commitment. You have said that. So I love that you said, you know, leave who you are, but don't stay there. You know, and I think for us, our students, not to stay there, they need a lot of reassurance, understanding of the system even. What does it mean to go to higher education? So I really appreciate all your comments. You have answered the questions in a magnificent way. I feel so inspired, and thank you so much for that. Thank you to each of you. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything, any of you as panelists, and you know, I think people must have been writing questions too, and we're going to address them in a little while. And yes, don't forget the helpers, because they are the systems that are going to help us move on with this and implement what we want to implement, which is equity, diversity, and inclusion. Well, thank you for this segment of the questions for you. Thank you for each of you. You have been of great inspiration as we continue to see the world around us evolve. And it's not going to stop. Somebody said this is not going to stop. This work is hard and it's never ending. As the demographics and diversity of early childhood education change, we must educate ourselves to be models and mentors for others and create cultures of inclusivity. When we do, innovation and success will follow. I hear you talking and I get excited because I know very firsthand about the classes for CDA and how many of these programs are trying so hard to embed equity. But we have the work, we have a lot of work, more work to do. At the Council, we believe that there will always be steps forward and challenges along the way. But no matter what your diversity dimensions are, we all have a responsibility to make this world a kinder, gentler place for all. We at the Council are deeply committed to that. Thank you for your attendance. We wish you are able to take something valuable from today's discussions to better serve those in your communities and organizations with an equity lens. And now we're going to move to the questions from the audience, and I am going to have the pleasure to leave leave with you on the questions, Alicia. Thank you.
Thank you, Velma. So if everyone could, if you have any questions, use that chat option on your panel to ask questions. We did have some links and resources, some wonderful links and resources shared that I did put into the chat just in case anyone couldn't see it in the questions box, but it also allows you to click on it from the chat so you can have those resources up and ready for you. And then what I can try to do is get these resources also sent out to you after the in an email after this session so that you still have access to it later. But let's take a few minutes to ask some questions, and I'll say them out to the panelists, and whoever feels whoever is ready to answer that question can just unmute themselves to do so.
Alicia, this is Katora. While we wait, anticipate questions, I just wanted to chime in and say, on behalf of the Council Alumni Network and the Credentialing Academy, this was quite insightful from my seat as well. Sometimes you're knee deep in the work and you don't ever get the opportunity to take a step back and look at either progress or, if you have encountered a barrier, where, you need to go next in that learning path, in that growth path, especially when you're trying to view things from an equity lens. I just wanted to highlight a few things that kind of stood out to me as we start to consider how we can unpack the complexities of our industry, and definitely the complexities of this particular topic, how we can really start to, as Christine lovely said, pull on our heartstrings and incorporate that in a way that seeds innovation and change. Some call to action was done around the equity project with Dr. Chantel Mick, but how can we invigorate and ignite our profession, individuals, even our practitioners, to join in that conversation? I'm particularly thinking about practitioner research, which is kind of a new thing, a new discovery of mine, to kind of push against that equity lens. And I'm wondering if the panelists can share their insights on this kind of new concept of the practitioner themselves mirroring more authentically representation of those who are actually doing the work, actually doing the research as well, or participating in the research process, and how that can change the scope of the approach to equity. Anyone can chime in and answer from the panelists.
This is Chris Anthony. I guess my answer is I don't know, but I think we have to start at the beginning in the sense of to get a cadre of faculty, researchers, and thought leaders who are coming from diverse perspectives. I mean, you have to sort of start at the beginning, right? They're not going from a high school diploma to a PhD or a DED or an MS. Like they need to go through some sort of pipeline as well. And so clearly this is my little bugaboo, but I think we just need to make, I think a good place to start is creating, I guess, pathways. We're pretty good at providing professional, non-academic credit professional development, and sometimes that can stack up. So, like at our organization, into a CDA credential. The CDA credential is one of, I think, the most accessible credentials in our field for sure. And then sometimes that can go into the associate's degree. And then I think it's after the associate's degree where we really start to hit those barriers. And so we have to figure out how we're going to take that group that maybe has an associate's degree, or maybe has gotten the CDA and then wants to get a bachelor's degree, because those are necessary steps to get to the level of faculty, thought leaders, research practitioners. And I just don't think we've focused on that piece enough. And I think that that needs to be where the focus is. I don't have the answers. I think we can infuse the system with some tuition monies, some funds, but that's not everything. I go back to what Dr. Grant said about providing mentorship. You know, for many people who are following that specific pathway I just talked about, the university landscape can be very foreign. You know, I would say to somebody, you should go to a community college who has an articulated program with a 4-year degree program. And even that sentence right there, that's a foreign language. So I really think we need to come up with some ways to really overcome that hurdle, because I think that's really what's clogging up the system in terms of creating thought leaders and researchers and faculty.
Thanks, Christine. That's a very great point to make around just challenging and thinking from it at the beginning stage, so that everything that follows is really congruent to the overall goal. I'm going to pause for a moment and let Andrea Hale, if I mispronounce your name, I apologize, come off mute and ask a question. Alicia, I think you have to unmute her then.
I have, and one, it'll say that I've muted her. Okay, now she's self-muted. And Andrea, I think you can unmute yourself now. No, it seems as though maybe she's still having an issue with that. So Andrea, do you mind typing your question in the questions box? And then that way I can say it verbally. While we are waiting for her, I do have 2 questions. One of them is, how do you work with communities that don't have so much diversity and don't believe that they need to learn about others?
I'd be happy to speak to this question. One of the things that we hear in feedback from our anti-racism courses quite frequently is this sentiment where there's conversation around a lack of diversity in programs. And one of the things I think that's really interesting that sometimes we forget is that diversity isn't just between groups, it's within groups. And so, you know, when we're looking at who we're working with, the likelihood that our lifestyles line up exactly really isn't high. And even if you are thinking just about the 3 Better Kid Care employees that are here today, between Christine and me, there's actually a lot of variation in our religious practices, our cultural beliefs, and just our ways of being and doing. And so I think one of the things that I love about the book that I mentioned earlier, the What If All the Kids Are White, is that that's really what it's talking about, is looking deeper than surface level diversity to really see that, you know, our cultural ways of being are different, that although we may in some ways look similar on the surface, the way we do things and our funds of knowledge, what we bring from our past experiences is very different.
Thank you, Laurie. Did anybody else maybe have anything to add to that? I thought that was really well spoken.
Did someone else want to talk? Did someone else just try to unmute?
It's okay, you go ahead.
The second part of that, and don't believe the need to learn about others. I won't talk a lot, but you know, I think that that's sort of that thing that we are kind of our mantra around here: start where you are, but don't stay there. So people don't believe they need to learn about others, but maybe with more exposure and sort of piggybacking on Laurie's description of intra-diversity, people may begin to see that they do need to learn about others. And this is heavy-handed, but I think a lot of organizations do it. They mandate some beginning training. So Penn State, for extension, we have to take some beginning training. That's one way to open eyes. It's probably not the best way, but I do think we just need to really respect that everybody's kind of at a different place to start the process.
And I was just going to piggyback on what both of you said. I think oftentimes this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion begins with an examination of one's own identity. And I think everybody loves to talk about themselves, right? So I think, thinking about examining one's own identity and how that influences how we show up in our workplace is a really great place to start, because it then begins to uncover how that applies to understanding the identities of others and how we interface with one another, and how that impacts our understanding of the importance of being culturally responsive to students and to coworkers. And so identity development is often a fantastic place to start.
I just wanted to add on top of that, these are all such great strategies to think about where everybody's coming in at different places too. Something that I have uncovered, and even within myself, is over years, is that we don't think we have culture sometimes, but we do. I think there are so many people that don't even think about their culture. And for example, that maybe in the summer you go pick blueberries every July and you make pies. These are some things we've talked about in some of our courses. Maybe every spring your family goes to the clearance section to get the winter coats on sale. And that these are all part of our background. And so starting with yourself and looking at all those pieces of you. And then the other piece, I think, when there might be resistance or might be this, in the question itself, is starting from curiosity and opening those conversations. Again, going back to that, the heart, and building relationships, listening and asking, and I'm wondering about, I'm curious about that, because I think sometimes we don't know. And so that can be to get people excited to talk about their own culture. Like you said, Lisa, we're all excited to talk about ourselves, but sometimes we don't realize that we have culture. So thinking about that we all have culture and we all have something to bring. Like Laurie said, even the three of us of like-minded people were very different.
Thank you. Andrea did she did put her question in the question box, and her question really is for everyone at Better Kid Care. You mentioned an equity tool that you use when planning professional development. Is this something that can be shared out?
It is a work in progress. I'm sorry, Christine, Belinda, do you want to go?
No, I was going to tell you to go.
Nobody wants to say. It's a work in progress, and so we're not completely done with it yet. But I will say that we belong as a organization to the Workforce Alliance, and the word registry is in there somewhere. And lots of states are creating their own lists for that kind, to look at professional development with that kind of lens. And I'm not on the subgroup that created that, but maybe Christine or Laurie could let me know if that was something we thought we would share, if that's just going to be an internal doc.
That is my work group, but I agree that it's not finished. We're still working on formatting and things like that to turn it into a usable document. I'm not sure if we ever talked about sharing it externally, but it's something we could consider.
Yeah, some of the pieces of it are very focused on the work that we're doing. But like Chris said, Dr. Anthony said, there are some really great resources out there. And there are, even in the equity, the Children's Equity Project that I mentioned, and you have the link to that, in that comprehensive tool, there are template ways to make you think about not only professional development, but policy and other things. So there are really wonderful resources out there. And as I mentioned, in Pennsylvania, if you're from Pennsylvania, to look at the, or look at your states, to go and look at your, like for example, in Pennsylvania, it's our Office of Child Development and Early Learning, like where your professional development is housed, to see what resources they have for higher education programs. I know on Pennsylvania's higher education page, there's some wonderful tools there that are for instructors and facilitators to think about professional development.
So I have a question. This is Vilma. So often I hear this question from teachers, and I'm curious to know how would you answer this. Teachers, because of the demographics in the United States presently, they ask how do you prepare early childhood teachers to work with children and families who have diverse languages? So they have diverse languages in the classroom, and often teachers feel frustrated. How do you give us some strategies?
I'll start off. It's been a while since I've actually been in an early childhood classroom. Laurie has much more recently been in classroom, but it certainly is a challenge. And what I think as a beginning step helps, there are two things. One is having some way, whether it's face-to-face with a translator or having your sort of intake forms translated into many languages, like you would know in your setting which ones, which languages are most commonly spoken in your geographical area outside of English. That it's important to, and I said intake forms, that's not really what I mean. It's more of a get to know you kind of form. I think most settings, centers, family homes, child care providers have those, but to try to really dig down and think about important questions to ask somebody whose first language is different than your first language. So I guess what I'm trying to say is to find some concrete ways to set the stage to help that that relationship get off to a good start. I can remember, I mean, it was years ago when I was in the classroom, but I could say, do you need to go to the bathroom in about 5 languages? Because I was on a campus and we had a right, you know, so you need to, perhaps you pick up some common phrases while the child is transitioning. Sign language has become more of a tool these days, especially when you're interacting with children, not necessarily the families. So I'll start the response to the question there and invite the fellow panelists to jump in if they would like.
So Christine, basically, and this is Vilma again, you were saying that one of the most important things is to kind of create confidence. You know, parents need to feel confident with the teacher. They have to have a rapport, even if they speak another language. That is not a reason not to build a relationship with them, right?
Absolutely. I love the way you summarize that. And then how do you build that confidence? So you think about the steps.
Exactly. You can find ways yeah, because I think when parents see teacher making efforts to even say good morning in their language, the message is very, very strong. You care for me, and I will do anything to communicate with you if you do anything to communicate with me, right? That's the point, I think. when we talk about equity, we need to talk, and Katura asked a question, from where do we begin? And this is very hard to answer. But another beginning point is for us, the ones that are in the professional development field, to come to terms with our own biases and our own questions and our own definitions and beliefs. So it's not only on the student side, it's not only on the early childhood educator student or teacher, it's also in the faculty, because you cannot be teaching something that you don't believe in, because it's going to show. It doesn't give you good results, right? So I think that we need to think about that too, in all the dimensions possible.
Vilma, this is Christine. Thank you for that. And I agree that everybody needs to be invested. And some of the research we're learning, that 1/3 of children in the United States are dual language learners. So
Yep.
Access and equality, it's an equity issue. And so it's our responsibility to learn. And again, back to resources, we have the policy statement on dual language learners from the Department of Education, and the reports links that we shared with you today, the Children's Equity Project, and have incredible resources for, as Chris shared, just learning even simple approaches to start to support children in their home language alongside of English. But we need to support that home language so that they have equal access to the full experience, the opportunity, the joy, and so we don't create gaps.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking, going along with that, is that there is absolutely imperative that we have preparation for teachers on dual language learning, because there's so many myths and so many thoughts about dual language learning, that we have to be very clear. We have to have that very clear. What is it that we have to be prepared on when we deal with children who are dual language learners, whether it's simultaneous or whether it's an additional language they add into their cognitive skills.
Yeah, we definitely need to look at it as a strength, right? It's a strength.
Absolutely. Lots of people think, including teachers, think children are going to get confused. There's so many myths, at least there are 12 that I know very clearly that we always talk about when it comes to dual language learning, which is not just for bilingual teachers. That's another thing, another myth. If you only take dual language learning if you speak Spanish, or if you have a child in your classroom, it's not. It's also for children who speak English, because the majority of the children also get the benefits of becoming bilingual in the other language. So I know parents who purposely are in long waiting lists and programs because the programs are bilingual, and they want their children who are American citizens to go to these programs to benefit from learning another language. So it goes both ways. And teachers, all teachers, English speakers or bilingual, they need to know the principles of dual language learning so that they can provide those services in a fantastic way.
I wanted to jump into this conversation too. I worked in an early childhood center, on Penn State campus, and I had children that spoke 9 different languages in my classroom at one time. And one of the things that we thought was so helpful was creating an environment where we just kind of normalized the idea that people spoke different languages. And we invited families in to share their language with us. We learned key words together from all of these different languages. And one of our very favorite activities was inviting families in to read Eric Carle books, because most of the children knew those stories. They were familiar with them in their home language. And so we would invite parents to come in and bring their version, and they would read those stories to us, and children would get excited and want to know like the animal names in Farsi after hearing the story read in that language. And then we could kind of compare and contrast different words, and we made it just a part of our everyday learning in the classroom.
That's beautiful. That's like the dream come true. I will just say something that, came to my mind from Barbara Bowman that says it's not enough to be amazed. You have to be interested. And I think that when you are interested, you get so much results.
I have one more question. I wanted to revisit something around just thinking from the systems level, understanding how hierarchical the higher education ecosystem is as a practice. Do you all have anything that you can share anecdotally around strategies to get buy-in from your leadership to make these policy changes, to consider them and implement them, even if you're invested at your level? Sometimes it is definitely an uphill battle, quite literally, to get that larger, umbrella system to invest and let that trickle down. Any thoughts on just that concept of like that systems thinking and getting that investment and buy-in from leadership?
This is Chris Anthony. For much of my higher ed career, when I was faculty and department head, this was a significant issue for me. It wasn't always around issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. It was more just issues around valuing early childhood education as a separate but complementary teacher preparation program to elementary education. And I clearly don't have all the answers, but I think the one thing, no, there's two. The two things that might move us, because I agree with you, higher education institutions are places of innovative thought, but change in practice in the higher ed system is slow. So I think getting leaders from diverse populations and diverse backgrounds is really, it is crucial. And because they will have some sort of lived experience. The other piece that I think is really important, that was helpful for me in a slightly different context, is I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, but being in the face, like being in the face of my dean and being in the face of the associate provost about how important early childhood is, and early childhood education is, and they responded to research, and they responded to stories. And so, we have student teachers go out and do practicums and telling stories about successes they've had. And in terms of research, many of you in the field know about the Heckman equation. So it was about, if we invest this much, we get this much on our return investment. And the Perry Preschool Project. I mean, people are aghast. For us, we know that research, but that there has been longitudinal data that suggests high quality early childhood education does all kinds of great things, even up to and including decreasing incarceration levels. And so I think to make higher ed institutional change, you've got to do two things. Well, I probably said more than two, but you got to kind of be in their face. And the other language they speak is money, quite frankly. You've got to show how the university's going to benefit from really investing in programs, financially and otherwise, I think.
Thanks, Christine. Those were great points. We can't be afraid to talk about money, especially in ECE, because we need it. Among all professions.
Historically, we are in a field that we're all about love and tenderness and understanding, but when it comes to issues that we really need we need to change that, because you just don't go to the supermarket and pay your groceries with love and kindness. You have to pay with money. So the salaries have to increase, the profession needs to be recognized, the labor of the people. Somebody talked about being, during this COVID situation, how people really realize that, hey, the early childhood educators are first responders, right? Never before was this recognized. So I think that we do need to be stronger when we talk to, like you talk about putting your face in front of course. And we know all of these things, the Heckman, and we know all of this, the Perry project. We need to take it out. We need to put it in somebody's face, so that they understand the importance, and how this country and any country will change tremendously when the children become first in the agenda. That's basically what it is. And then all of the other pieces will fall into place. So we right now we have a system that is a little, not so together, but we're trying really hard. Thank you.
Beautiful last words from everyone. I'll just pivot to Alicia. I just want to be cognizant of our time and stopping at 2:45. And any final words from our moderator or our panelists? Feel free to have some last words if you so choose.
I just have one quick thing to add to what you all were just sharing, those really important points on advocating for our field. And that's the point I wanted to make, was that advocacy is part of our responsibility. And there are, again, organizations that have incredible advocacy toolkits, because sometimes even though you want to advocate, you may not know ways to do that, ways to go talk to. And in higher ed, we know that, but in general, talking about our early childhood community field, well, and maybe even some of us in our higher ed roles, it's daunting. So we need some frameworks for that advocacy and some resources. And there are some incredible toolkits out there through Head Start and through, I'm sure, even the higher ed organizations that are on this call. But to remember that there are advocacy toolkits to support us in that work.
Just I want to say to those of you who work with students at the CDA level, teaching CDA classes, that I tip my hat to you, because that is one of the examples of equity that I can think of, that I'm proud of. I'm proud of working at the council. We not only talk about these things, but we live them. And we're very committed to providing the opportunity to get CDAs to all teachers, because we believe that anyone that touches the life of a child needs to be a competent and skillful early childhood educator. So to those of you who are helping those communities in other languages, or communities that are trying to meet licensing requirements, etc., thank you, because that is what we're talking about. We're providing those resources and those opportunities to meet the needs of those who are challenged by all these barriers. And I think that is remarkable. So thank you very much.
Alicia, do you want to close us out? Looks like she's having some technical difficulties. So on behalf of the Council for Professional Recognition, I just want to humbly thank everyone, our attendees, our panelists, our moderator, for the grace and wealth of knowledge that you have shared from your seats. I'm walking away with so many notes and takeaways that I hope to incorporate into my work, and I hope you have benefited from this exchange of information and can do the same. So let's continue this equity journey and implement with intentionality. And I wish you all the best and enjoy your afternoon and have a good rest of your your day and weekend. Thank you.